So yesterday I had to do something fairly heartbreaking, and I essentially had to deny a tenant. I had to tell them no, that I wouldn't allow them to rent a property that I manage here in Baltimore City, mostly due to financial issues in their past. Now, maybe with my own property, I could have been a little bit even more easygoing about this, but unfortunately I do manage this for this other person, and a lot of landlords are very fearful, very frightened of renting to tenants with any sort of financial struggles or credit history past, even if it was beyond their control. And today I wanted to explain why. Why is it that a lot of landlords will actually rather have a vacant house than even give someone a second chance within this city? And unfortunately, it's pretty logical. It's based on a lot of laws that are passed from the city. This is a tenant-friendly city. If you don't know what that is, we'll go into it. But essentially, Baltimore City does not want landlords to give people a second chance. And in fact, even city officials, not like governors and such, but like people in the housing departments have even basically told me, stop renting to these people. And just note for this video, I am talking strictly about landlords who actually take care of the property. They are the ones who are actually the victims in these situations. I am not talking about slum landlord rentals where they don't take care of the property. I'm talking about the ones who really have a quality place for someone who really needs just a good chance to live somewhere nice. So what does exactly it mean to be a tenant-friendly city or state? Essentially what it is the laws in the city are a lot more favored toward tenants than they are toward landlords. This might initially seem like a really good thing. The laws are there to protect the theoretically weaker individuals in the transaction. A lot of people believe, mistakenly so, that landlords are rich elites and such. How else could they acquire dozens of properties? On my channel, I talk about how I even did that with actually only starting with $500. You can actually acquire properties without any money necessarily. It's difficult. We'll go into that in other videos. But tenants believe this. Tenants are the larger voting population, and therefore the laws tend to favor them. And so basically these laws make evictions very, very difficult. They essentially can take up to 3 months is how they're supposed to take, but to be honest, most landlords find it's more like 3 to 6 months, and oftentimes as far as a year. I've had tenants hold my house hostage for a year and a half, 2 years, and unfortunately during that entire process that they can hold the house hostage by abusing a lot of these eviction laws, or these laws that are meant to protect tenants, which we'll get into how tenants can take advantage of those. Essentially, because of all that, it is a lot better to just simply have a vacant house, not rent the house at all. And if you have to go through the eviction process, you're going to find that housing officials actually say, well, you shouldn't have rented to that person. They have literally told me that. Now you're left with this choice. You know, it's kind of like if you, a tenant, may be watching this, you know, if you lent anyone your car just to use casually, and that person decided not to bring it back, just imagine they don't have to return it legally for up to 2 years. They don't have to give you that car back. You still have to make the payments on it, and if they crash that car, then you still have to pay for it, but you can go to court for it, and they basically don't have to give it to you. And so you're going to start to get really picky about who exactly you're loaning your car to. And this can apply to any situation. And of course, in this situation, we're talking about a house with a very high mortgage. Keep in mind, remember, just because you have multiple different properties doesn't mean you're rich. In fact, a lot of people with multiple properties, in fact, a majority of people with multiple properties, oftentimes are just someone who simply owned a house, moved out of it, and then moved into another house, and then they just started renting the one they lived in. So a lot of these people can't really float 2 different mortgages, and the city didn't give a lot for that. Now, there were some rental assistance programs, but a lot of those were really backed up, really hard to get involved with, and the worst part was you had to actually get the tenant involved with you in order to make that work, which of course could cause problems if you were dealing with what we like to call professional squatters or professional tenants. So basically, professional tenants are people who specialize in abusing these laws, and what they do is try to make themselves look like a tenant whom I just had to reject. They say the same things, that nothing was ever their fault, that all of these financial circumstances were beyond their control, that it was something that happened to them. So of course they're going to lie and try to make themselves look like just like a person who honestly, if was just given a second chance, could excel in life. So you have to make that choice. Do you want to give them that second chance and take the risk of having to pay for a mortgage for up to 2 years, oftentimes a year in a lot of cases, or just simply say no and move on and let someone else deal with that problem? Now, a lot of people may come at this with a sense of, well, why don't you try to help the tenant and get on better financial footing? I've actually tried to do this. I even had rental programs, I guess you can call it, where I actually reduced the rent in my properties by a little bit of amount. But if they followed like financial programs to get back on track in life, the problem is for anyone who actually has tried to help someone financially, this is absurdly difficult. It is extremely hard to help people with finances. If you can get them to even talk about it at all, a lot of times they won't do what's necessary in order to actually fix the situation, as a lot in most financial issues are self-inflicted wounds, if not from inaction from before, actions they're taking now that are all starting to add up and compound. And a lot of times getting them to stop those actions, it could be things that they will justify in their mind as things that they need or want or have to do, and you can't stop it. Unfortunately, I've helped a lot of people with financial struggles, and it takes months, years. It is a very grueling process to help someone financially. So what is the response from landlords, essentially, who are burdened with this type of situation? Well, essentially, if you're not renting in what we call Class B, Class A environments, which are where people often are a little bit more financially savvy, have a lot more financial education, have more finances, essentially, where you can just rent to them as market, most people just turn to Section 8 programs, which of course then becomes this bread and butter of landlords in the city. A lot of them only rent to Section 8 tenants. In fact, if I ever buy a house in a Class C or less neighborhood, essentially I won't rent to market tenants. If the tenant has to pay their own rent, I'm not renting to you, is essentially the kind of attitude you take. You might say, well, that should be illegal, you can't do that, whatnot. But to be honest, it's not very difficult to essentially only get Section 8 tenants when you just go through programs and stuff to find your tenants. So if I go through the Section 8 program or whatnot, then all I'm gonna get is Section 8 applicants. And keep in mind, Section 8, replace that word with any housing voucher program. But that's how you essentially get around it. Anyone who has their advertisement openly marketed oftentimes will just ignore people who aren't under rental assistance. And this is what I've often found to be the case. Now, I'm not saying that landlords don't rent to market tenants. Clearly they do in these harsher neighborhoods, but for the majority and most part, the general consensus among landlords is if you have to pay your rent, then I don't trust you to do so. So if you're a tenant who has had a lot of difficulty getting to rent a property and you're going through a lot of financial struggles, the solution for you is actually very difficult, because obviously then buying a house is also sort of out of the question. So you're left with extremely limited options and extremely hard pressed to actually move forward in life. And so, I can definitely relate to this. I can definitely understand it. For anyone who's watched my videos, I definitely do not come from a rich background of any sort. So I can get it. And even there are things in my past that have actually held me up that people didn't give me a second chance on, and it did hurt me. So that's the unfortunate thing. I mean, what is the solution? I mean, in all honesty, I don't know what that would exactly be, but I think even for myself, just because I don't like this sort of effect, I personally don't like renting in neighborhoods where the financial levels were a lot lower. I just refuse to do it. I don't actually really, I have like one Section 8 tenant. I'm not really a big fan of going that route. And I just rather we just go to neighborhoods that are a little bit better off. So unfortunately, that's kind of the reaction that I personally have had. But I want to know, if you're a landlord, what's the reaction you've had to the fact that the eviction laws essentially are so strict that Baltimore effectively tells you, hey, stop renting to these people or else we're going to punish you for it.